feels a bit wobbly. So the guy with the red little stripe, that's where we're looking. This camera here. Yeah. Okay. Hello everyone. Welcome to the Fair Funding Now campaign launch. We're very excited about what's going to happen here today. Firstly, I'd like to acknowledge that we are standing on the lands of the Wurundjeri people of the Kulin Nations and pay our respects to the elders past and present of this land. Always was and always will be their land. And most importantly, for the children of the future, our Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander children who have been so impacted by the devastating cuts that have been delivered by the Morrison government. Let's talk about those cuts. Firstly, I'd like to acknowledge that we also have here today Susan Hopgood, the Secretary of the AEU, Meredith Peace from the AEU Victorian branch. We're also joined by Sally McManus and Michelle O'Neill from the ACTU. And for those people watching this on Facebook Live, what we can see now is a green sea of supporters, Fair Funding Now supporters, and I'd like to thank you for coming along to this launch today. We are joined right across the country by an incredible group of supporters who've been with us on the campaign trail fighting to achieve fair funding for public schools. But let's talk about the cuts that have been delivered by the Morrison government. Under the Morrison government, we have seen huge cuts to our schools, $14 billion of funding for public schools delivered, legislation that went through Parliament in 2017, which has brought in for the first time a cap, a 20% cap on the federal funding that can be delivered in terms of the schooling resource standard, the standard which is the minimum benchmark of funding that our schools need. Not only that, but the Morrison government completely tore up signed agreements that were delivered under the original Gonski deal, agreements that were going to put the funding that we need into our schools. Late last year, in 2018, the Morrison government coerced state governments to sign up to a whole range of new funding agreements which have had a huge impact on our schools and the resources that they need in terms of the schooling resource standard. These agreements, we've now done an analysis, and we can tell you that these agreements mean that 99% of public schools will not hit that minimum benchmark, that schooling resource standard that's so important for our kids. And yet, with the Morrison government's clear preference for private schools, we know that 99% of private schools will be at or above that benchmark. Let's talk about that for a minute, because what we've also seen under the Morrison government is a $4.6 billion special deal delivered to private schools to restore some of the money that they say was cut from private schools late last year. And yet not a single cent has been returned to public schools to replace the $14 billion that's been cut. We welcome the commitment from Labor to put in $14.1 billion of funding into public schools. This is a game changer for our schools, and it's money that we have been campaigning long and hard to achieve. Right now, in our schools, we need to see the resources for additional teachers, for additional support staff, to make sure that our children have access to the learning programs that they need. And we're about to head out into our communities. We're very excited today to announce the next phase of our campaign, the Fair Funding Now campaign, and that is the launching of 10 vans who will be travelling around the country, right around Australia, going into our schools and communities and talking to people about the clear choice as we head into this election between making sure that we have a government that puts public schools first. We know that parents understand the issue of funding in our schools, and we know that our parents are very committed to making sure that their children are in schools that are fully resourced. It's that one-on-one conversation that is so important, and as we launch this part of our campaign today, we are going to go out and visit those schools. We're going to back that up with advertising, with door knocking and with one-on-one conversations in the lead up to the next federal election. Because this federal election must be about education. It must be about funding public schools. And that is what we expect to see from a future government as we head into the federal election. So I'm now going to invite Meredith Peace from the Victorian branch to say a few words about the importance of public school funding here in Victoria. And then as we unveil our vans, we're then going to cross to our presidents in Queensland, Kevin Bates from the QTU, Pat Byrne at the SSTU WA in Western Australia, and Murray Mulheron from the New South Wales Teachers Federation to participate in the launching of this van on the big screen. So welcome, Meredith.
Thanks, Karina. It's fantastic to be here today for this national launch, and we're really looking forward to this campaign over the coming months. But whilst we're here to do that national launch, I want to focus a little bit on Victoria. Victorian public schools have had hundreds of millions cut from their budgets in 2018 and 19 alone, let alone over the long term. Money that could be used to support our students and provide them with the individual support that they need every day in our classrooms and in our schools. The Andrews government is to be commended on refusing to be coerced by the Morrison government to sign a long-term funding deal. They are standing up for public school students and saying that public school students in Victoria must be funded in the same way and at the same level as those students who go to non-government schools. I think that's what parents in our community expect, that governments fund our children fairly when it comes to education, and the Morrison government has failed on that front. We also commend the Shorten opposition for committing over $800 million in their first 3 years of their government if they're elected later this year. That will be really important for public school students and for our members who are supporting those students. We're going out into our local communities, as Karina has said. We're targeting 4 marginal seats, and every Liberal and National Party politician needs to be on notice that we're going to be talking to our members, to the community, and most specifically to parents about the fact that we expect students in public schools to be funded fairly. That's all we're asking, for fair funding, and we want it now. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Meredith. And now the exciting moment has arrived, and I'm going to ask Meredith, Sally, Michelle and Susan to unveil our Fair Funding Now van. Are you ready? Okay, 1, 2, 3, here we go. Isn't she a beauty? So this van is going to be joined by 9 others around the country, and we're about to do a live cross to Sydney, where we'll hear from Murray Mulheron, the President of the New South Wales Teachers Federation, about the importance of public school funding for New South Wales.
4, 3, 2, 1.
Good morning, I'm Murray Mulheron, President of the New South Wales Teachers Federation. Today we're in sunny Sydney, where we're going to be launching the next phase of the Fair Funding campaign. This is a campaign that we're going to take to school communities right across New South Wales, alerting the community to the fact that the Morrison government has turned its back on students in public schools. Already they have cut $14 billion over the projected funding of the next 10 years. That, in a sense, means that 99% of public schools will not be reaching the minimum schooling resource standard. At the same time, they've launched a $4.6 billion slush fund for private schools, of which not one single dollar goes to public schools. That means about 99% of private schools by 2023 will be resourced over the schooling resource standard. So in essence, nearly all public schools will be under-resourced and most private schools over-resourced. This is due to a funding cap that the Commonwealth Government has artificially imposed on their funding model, where they, the national government, say they only have to contribute 20% of funding to public schools, but they're prepared to fund non-government schools up to 80%. This is the first time in our history that a national government has said its primary commitment is to the non-government sector at the expense of students in public schools. This is an important message that we'll be taking not only to targeted seats like up in Page and Robertson, in Banks, in Gilmore and the South Coast, but we'll be taking this message to our school communities right across New South Wales over the next few weeks and months leading up to the federal election. It's simply unfair to say that students who are enrolled in public schools aren't going to get the resources they need, the minimum amount of resources they need to meet national benchmark figures. So today we're going to be launching the next phase of the campaign. Vans, people, resources will be put out into our school communities so that the message is taken to parents, to principals and to teachers. We know this campaign has popular support because Australians understand the need to fund our kids and fund our public schools properly. It's the Morrison government that has ripped $14 billion out of school funding over the next 10 years to public schools. The ALP, in contrast, is guaranteeing that they will return that $14 billion to the public education system. For New South Wales, that would mean an additional almost $1 billion coming into public schools in New South Wales if the Morrison government is defeated at the federal election. So it gives me great pleasure to launch the next phase of the campaign. Our vans are ready, they're stocked, they're ready to go out directly into our school communities to talk to parents, to politicians, to candidates, to principals and to parents for a very strong message. Fair funding now for all our kids in our public schools.
Thank you very much, Maury and New South Wales. And as you can see, those vans are going to be joined by a lot of cars also hitting the road. Now we're going to do a live cross to Brisbane. So I'd like to introduce Kevin Bates, President of the QTU. Thank you.
Hi Melbourne, my name is Kevin Bates and I'm the President of the Queensland Teachers Union and we're beaming to you live from Brisbane. We're here below the Kangaroo Point Cliffs on the Brisbane River to launch our 3 Fair Funding Now vans. Here in Queensland, the Morrison government has cut hundreds of millions of dollars from our state schools in 2018 and 2019. Federal Labor's promise of $647 million extra for Queensland state schools between 2020 and 2022 will make a significant difference for every student in our schools. From today, we'll be out in the community talking to teachers and principals about the extra funding for their specific schools and with parents about what that will mean in terms of additional teachers, smaller classes and more one-on-one attention for students. Every child at every school deserves fair funding, and that's the message we'll be talking about as we visit various communities throughout Queensland. Well done.
Thank you, Queensland. That's fantastic. Now we're going to do a cross to Perth, where we will hear from Pat Byrne, President of the SSTU WA. Thanks, Pat.
Stop. Hello, everyone. Well, it's just after 9 o'clock in the morning here in Perth on a beautiful sunny morning. I'm Pat Byrne, and I'm the President of the State School Teachers Union of Western Australia. We're here on the South Perth foreshore this morning. We've got the City of Perth behind us and also our 2 Fair Funding Now vans ready to go. In Western Australia, the federal government's funding model will have a significant negative impact. Not only will it see hundreds of millions of dollars taken out of schools in 2018 and 2019, but for 6 years beyond that. For example, in Western Australia, a small to medium-sized secondary school in the Perth metropolitan area that has a budget of, say, $11 million will lose about $800,000 of that in purchasing power over the next 6 years under this model. That's why we need to campaign against it. Federal Labor has committed, if elected, to giving $500 million to Western Australian schools in the next 3 years. That would have a huge positive impact for teachers and students all over Western Australia. That's the message we're campaigning to bring to the community of Western Australia. Starting this week, we'll be in the Perth metropolitan area in our targeted electorates. We'll be then going to the regions. We'll be in the Midwest, we'll be in the Goldfields, and we'll be in the Southwest, making sure that parents and communities all over Western Australia understand what's at stake here. We're reaffirming the purpose of this campaign, which is to make sure that schools in Western Australia are properly resourced so that all students, no matter where they live in this huge state of ours, are actually funded so they get a fair go and a quality public provision of education. We can do this. We will do this. Let's go WA.
Fantastic. Thank you, WA. That's fantastic. So, Scott Morrison's huge cuts to our schools deserve a huge response, and that is exactly what we're going to deliver in the lead up to this federal election. The Morrison government has no plan for public schools to reach 100% of that schooling resource standard, the minimum resource standard that we need for our kids. And we're going to make sure in communities right across Australia that those conversations are taking place about the clear choice as we head into this election. We need every political party to put public schools first. 2.5 million children in our schools deserve that. They deserve a fair go, and that's what we're going to be taking to the election as we make this the education election for public schools. We've got the commitment from Labor in terms of their $14 billion back to our schools, and we've also got a commitment from the Greens, who also support the need for every school to be at 100% of the schooling resource standard. We need you to join us as well. For our Facebook community that's beaming in right now, we need you to help us get this message out. And what I can say is that we have a massive army of Fair Funding Now volunteers who are mobilising around the country, and we're going to do this for our children. So in conclusion, I'd like to invite Sally McManus and Michelle O'Neill to say a few words from the ACTU.
Thanks, Karina. Hey, well done to the AEU right across the country. How fantastic. See all these green buses and cars that are going to be traversing the whole of the country in a cavalcade, I do believe. Even though they're not together, they're spreading all around the country, because it's really fundamental to fairness, isn't it, that we make sure our schools are fairly funded. We make sure that every child gets a fair go. It's fundamental to the fair go and fundamental to the Change the Rules campaign that we all win. So Michelle and I are bringing the support of the whole trade union movement, aren't we, Michelle?
Yeah. Thanks, Sally. I want to congratulate the AEU. It is an amazing campaign, and you should rest assured that the whole of the trade union movement is backing you in this, because what's more important? This is about the education of our kids. And, of course, this is about the future of our country, because it's good quality education that's fairly delivered, where funding is available to every school, regardless of the income of your parents or the suburb or country, town that you were born in or city or that you live in. Everything should go towards making sure that funding for schools is fair, and there's nothing fair about what the Morrison government has done in cutting public school funding. So we're with you on the campaign. We love the buses. Oh, sorry. We love the vans, and we're really looking forward. I hope we get to drive one day. We're looking forward to seeing them all over the country, and we're with you fighting for fair funding now.
Fantastic. Thank you, Sally and Michelle, and we really appreciate having your support, and we know that the trade union community stands with us on this issue. I'd like to invite all of our Fair Funding Now supporters to come in and gather around the van, and we might give a huge cheer for fair funding. So please, come on in. Sure. So, what do we want? When do we want it? What do we want? When do we want it? What do we want? When do we want it? What do we want? When do we want it? Resources delayed are resources denied. Let's hit the campaign trail, friends. Thank you everyone for coming out today. We really appreciate your support. I could if I had microphone. Can you just stay for a few minutes for photographs if that's okay? We've just got some photographers here that will get some shots if you don't mind gathering in. You're all right to go. Can we get one quick shot? Should we get one quick shot? And then, yeah, that'd be great. Thank you. Thanks, guys. It was great, wasn't it? Yeah, that's it. Thanks.